I would be remiss if I didn't point out that out of the 7 letters of Ignatius, his letter to the Roman Church, of all places, is the only one that does not mention a bishop. Now, admittedly, some Protestants have taken this fact and, in my opinion, have run a little bit too far with it to suggest that there was no bishop at all in the first century church. I vehemently disagree with this proposition because, as I've stated numerous times already, Clement of Rome from the first century does acknowledge that there is a plurality of bishops in the Church of Rome. I also believe there are other reasonable explanations as to why Ignatius doesn't mention any bishops in Rome, namely because Rome is the capital city of the empire at that time. It's the location that he is being brought to be martyred, and so if he were to publicly identify who the bishops of the Church of Rome were, that would put them in great danger to the authorities. I do accept that as a valid reason why Ignatius wouldn't mention any bishop of Rome as he's being carried off to Rome. But it does make you question when you combine Clement's explicit declaration of a 2-office structure in the Church of Rome in the first century, and you combine that with the fact that Ignatius can't even mention in passing anonymously that there are any bishops of Rome in the Roman Church, it should make you question whether or not there was such a thing as a Roman primacy, where the singular bishop of Rome really did possess this great universal authority that Roman Catholicism holds to today. This isn't a doctrinal development issue, this is a historical issue. Much like the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, a historical event either happened or it didn't happen. It's not as if the first century Christians questioned each other, wondering if Jesus really rose from the dead, and then only until after a doctrinal development process took place centuries afterwards were they finally able to confirm, yes, Jesus did indeed rise from the dead. Obviously, they knew that Jesus rose from the dead from the day that it happened. The same goes for whether or not the doctrine of the papacy is a historical event that took place. Either the Bishop of Rome was given universal jurisdiction and the ability to have infallible authority from the moment that it was conferred upon him in the first century, or it didn't. This is not something that could be developed over time, where the first century Christians had no idea that the Pope had infallible authority or universal jurisdiction in the first century, but then many centuries later they realized, oh, he did this entire time and we didn't just recognize it. My contention is that if the papacy and all its essential attributes, the ability to speak ex cathedra, the universal jurisdiction over the church, the position of being the vicar of Christ on earth, if all of these qualities are essential for the Christian world today, then they have to have their precedent found in the time of the first century. These are not concepts that can be developed over time. And based on statements that we see from men such as Clement of Rome and Ignatius's omission of any bishops whatsoever in the Church of Rome, taking these into consideration allows us to conclude as historical Protestants that the papacy did not exist in the first century. And so as a result, it is not a doctrine of necessity. An objection could be made to this proposition from Ignatius's letter to the Romans by appealing to the salutation of the letter, where Ignatius labels the Roman Church as the church that is preeminent in the place of the district of the Romans, the church that is worthy of God, worthy of honor, worthy of blessing, worthy of praise, worthy of success, worthy of sanctification, again, preeminent over love. All of these descriptions could insinuate that this church, far above all others, is greater and grander because of its primacy. My response is to agree that it is valid to call the Church of Rome the preeminent church, but not because they possess any inherent qualities or greater authority than any other of the Christian churches, but simply because they are the church that exists in the preeminent city of the Roman Empire. After all, they're in Rome. Rome is the preeminent city, the prestigious city, the city that is set apart from all the others, and so therefore the Roman Church is distinguished as that church that is indeed a part of that community. There's a great passage that I want to point out from Ignatius's letter to the Smyrnians, chapter 8, which demonstrates that he did not see the Church of Jesus Christ as an institution in the way that the Roman Catholic Church or various Orthodox churches understand that concept today. If we take a look at Smyrnians chapter 8, we see that Ignatius once again is adamant about the bishop's role in the life of a Christian. He says that no one does anything that pertains to the church without the bishop. And he says that we must consider valid that Eucharist, which is held under the bishop or whomever he appoints. So in this passage, Ignatius appears to indicate that a bishop is necessary for anyone to do anything pertaining to the church. And without a bishop, a group cannot be considered a valid church. However, as we examined in my previous video on Ignatius, he is still able to recognize a church as a valid church even without a literal physical bishop, so long as the Lord Jesus is presiding over the church. We see an example of this in his letter to the Romans, chapter 9. This demonstrates that Ignatius is not so much concerned with a strict Episcopalian form of church government as he is with faithfulness to the apostolic teaching of Jesus Christ. The church in Syria, though they don't have a valid bishop because Ignatius, after all, is on his way to be martyred, they can still be regarded as a genuine church because they are in accordance with Jesus Christ, who constantly oversees them. And even the Church of Rome, which Clement indicates has a Presbyterian church model, can be considered a valid church because they are in accordance with the doctrine of Jesus Christ, despite the fact they don't have a singular, ontologically distinct bishop in their church. This leads us to the primary point I want to make on the topic of the one true church, which is found in the very next verse. Ignatius says, "Wherever the bishop appears, let the congregation be there. Just as wherever Jesus Christ is, the Catholic Church is there." Now, obviously, the Catholic Church here, Catholic is just another word for universal, so Ignatius is referring to the universal church at large. But it's interesting to point out that Ignatius identifies the location of the Catholic Church as that where Jesus Christ is. And it is with this statement that Roman Catholicism and various forms of orthodoxy find themselves in a great dilemma. If Protestant churches truly do have Jesus Christ affiliated with them, then this means that there is no such thing as a one true church, a one true institution where the fullness of the faith is found. Because if Jesus Christ is just as present in Protestant churches as he is with Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches, then this means that the presence of Jesus Christ expands beyond denominational lines, defeating the notion of one true church. There are really only two ways to reject this notion. The first is to suggest that while Protestant churches may truly have Jesus Christ, they do not have him as fully as an institution like the Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox Church does. But that doesn't fit with the language of Ignatius here, because he says wherever Jesus Christ is, the Catholic Church is there. So the Catholic Church, whatever the concept of Catholic Church he is referring to, is just as present in Protestant churches as he is in Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox churches. There is no degree of being a lesser Catholic Church and a greater Catholic Church that is found in the language of Ignatius here. The only other alternative around this notion of defeating the one true church view is to suggest that Protestant churches, because they're not affiliated with the Catholic Church, therefore do not have Jesus Christ. This means that Jesus Christ is not present in any Protestant church, and therefore this means that every single Protestant on the face of the earth is apart from Jesus Christ, considered anathematized heretics. Now, especially in the case of Roman Catholicism, ever since the Second Vatican Council, which took place last century, this view of every Protestant being an anathematized heretic is definitely a minority view in the Roman Catholic Church. But the logic still follows. If a church is only part of the Catholic Church because Jesus Christ is there, and Protestant churches are not part of the Catholic Church, then that must mean that Jesus Christ is not a part of Protestant churches. And if he is, then Protestant churches are just as much the Catholic Church as the Roman Catholic Church is.